He fired every secretary in weeks until the clumsy, stubborn one changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's incredible story. A CEO who had fired every secretary he could find, only to be left with one final choice. A clumsy, stubborn woman who would change everything he thought he knew about loyalty and success. But what happens next will surprise you. Meet Edward Miller, the CEO of Miller Tech, a multi-million-dollar company known for its innovative gadgets and top-tier software. Edward had always been a man of high standards. Nothing was ever good enough, especially when it came to his staff. He had gone through 10 secretaries in the last few weeks alone. No one could meet his expectations. They were either too slow, too careless, or simply didn't match the level of professionalism he demanded. He was ruthless when it came to finding perfection. But then, in walked Lisa Roberts, the newest hire, a woman with no polished resume or flawless track record. Lisa was the opposite of the perfect secretary he imagined. She was clumsy, constantly knocking things over, fumbling through papers, and always losing her pens. On her first day, she managed to spill coffee on the company's new marketing presentation, something that would have gotten any other secretary fired on the spot. Edward was furious. He stood up from his desk, his cold eyes narrowing in on her. "I don't have time for mistakes, Miss Roberts," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is a high-stakes business. Get your act together, or you're out." Lisa looked at him with a determined expression. She wasn't intimidated, though she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller," she said, wiping the spilled coffee off the papers. "But I'm not going anywhere." Edward stared at her for a moment, his jaw tightening. He was used to people crumbling under pressure, especially in front of him. But Lisa didn't flinch. In fact, she stood taller. There was something about her stubbornness, her refusal to back down, that intrigued him. She wasn't perfect, but there was a certain fire in her eyes, a determination to succeed that he hadn't seen in anyone else. Despite the rough start, Edward decided to give her another chance. After all, it wasn't like he had anyone else who could handle his schedule. As the days passed, Lisa proved to be more than just a clumsy secretary. She was resourceful, hardworking, and surprisingly quick to pick up on things that were vital to the business. Her dedication began to shine through. She might not have had the experience or the polish, but she had something far more important: grit. Edward couldn't help but notice the small things she did, the way she handled difficult situations with grace, and how she never once complained about the impossible demands he threw at her. Her tenacity started to change things in the office. She made him question his own approach to leadership. Was he too harsh? Had he been expecting too much from the people around him? As the weeks went by, Edward realized that there was more to Lisa than met the eye. She was capable of far more than anyone, including himself, had given her credit for. But could this stubborn, clumsy woman really change everything for him? Edward had never been one to back down from a challenge. And he certainly wasn't going to back down now. Edward couldn't believe what he was seeing. Lisa, the clumsy, stubborn woman he'd almost fired countless times, was actually making things happen. It had been a few weeks since she spilled coffee on the presentation, and though that had started as the worst day of her career, she had turned things around in a way no one could have expected. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving in an environment where no one else could. As the days passed, Edward found himself noticing more and more about her. It wasn't just that she was competent now, but that she seemed to understand him, his work, and the way the company operated. She was taking initiative, handling situations with grace, and even fixing problems that he didn't know existed. Edward wasn't used to having someone in his office who didn't buckle under pressure. And it wasn't just that Lisa wasn't intimidated by him, she was actually starting to make him look at his own actions. He realized that he had been far too harsh with his previous assistants, expecting them to read his mind, anticipating every need before he even asked. Lisa, however, didn't need to anticipate anything. She asked questions, and she took action. If she didn't understand something, she would learn it herself. Edward respected that. As much as he hated to admit it, she was proving herself to be exactly what he needed. But that wasn't the end of it. One afternoon, when Edward walked into the office after a long meeting, he found Lisa in a heated discussion with one of the senior managers, Paul. He wasn't sure what had happened, but he could tell Paul was frustrated. Lisa, however, stood firm. "That's not how this works," she said, crossing her arms. "We need to take care of this issue now, or it'll be a bigger problem later. Don't tell me you don't have time. I've seen your calendar, and you've got nothing more important than this." Paul looked taken aback, but Lisa didn't waver. She didn't let him walk away. She didn't let him sweep the problem under the rug. Edward, from the doorway, had never seen someone stand up to Paul like that, and in a strange way, he admired it. The very same woman who had spilled coffee on his prized presentation was now putting Paul in his place, taking charge when no one else would. He had to admit. He didn't like to admit it, but it was impressive. The next day, things shifted in the office. Lisa was suddenly included in more high-level meetings. Edward had asked her opinion on a few projects. She didn't have much experience in some areas, but her fresh perspective was invaluable. There was something about the way she saw the world differently that helped him see things from a new angle. As the week went on, Lisa's presence became more than just useful. She was becoming indispensable, and Edward started to wonder, how had he been so blind to this before? He was used to people falling in line with his orders, working in a way that followed his vision, but Lisa was different. She wasn't following his vision. She was creating her own. One evening, after work, Lisa walked up to him with a hesitant smile. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "I've been thinking. I know I'm just your secretary, but I'd really like to be more involved with the team. I have a lot of ideas, and I think they could help." Edward looked at her, his heart pounding a little faster than usual. He had never expected this from her. He wasn't sure he was even ready to hear it. He was used to seeing people ask for more responsibility, but not like this. There was something in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. It was raw, honest, and hopeful. "What do you mean by more involved?" Edward asked, his tone more gentle than he intended. Lisa stood a little straighter. "I mean, I could take on more projects, work directly with the teams, maybe even handle some of the client meetings. I know I'm not a high-powered executive, but I've been here long enough to see what works and what doesn't. I could be of more use if you'd just give me the chance." Edward didn't answer right away. He was silent for a moment, contemplating. There was something about her persistence, her determination, that made him want to take a risk. He had seen her work ethic, her ability to handle stress, and her capacity to learn. Maybe she wasn't just a secretary after all. Maybe, just maybe, she could be the one who would finally help him fix some of the problems he'd been struggling with in the company. Edward thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "Okay, Lisa," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I'll give you the chance. Let's see what you can do." Lisa's face lit up with a mix of relief and excitement. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. I won't let you down." Edward walked away, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He hadn't expected to feel this way, proud even. But as he watched her walk back to her desk, he realized something. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about firing someone. He was thinking about giving someone a chance to grow. And that was something he hadn't done in a long time. Edward had given Lisa the opportunity, but he wasn't sure what to expect. To his surprise, she didn't just meet his expectations, she exceeded them. Over the next few weeks, Lisa took charge of multiple projects with ease, impressing the entire team with her fresh approach and attention to detail. The company, which had been stagnant in certain areas, started to see noticeable improvements. Lisa's work ethic and determination made a difference in ways Edward hadn't imagined. At first, he had been hesitant to let her take on more responsibility, but now he couldn't imagine doing it without her. One day, after a particularly long meeting with a potential investor, Edward walked back to his office, only to find Lisa sitting at his desk, a pile of paperwork neatly arranged in front of her. "I thought you might need this," she said with a small smile. Edward raised an eyebrow. "You're going through my files now?" he asked, half teasing, half surprised. "I thought it might help if I took a look at the numbers myself. You were getting distracted with the presentation. I went ahead and streamlined some of the figures for you. It should be easier to present to the investors tomorrow. Edward stared at her for a moment, not sure what to say. He had never seen anyone, let alone a secretary, take such initiative. "I didn't ask you to do this," he said, his voice softer than usual. Lisa shrugged. "You didn't ask me to do most of the things I've done, but you gave me the chance, so I'm taking it." Edward felt a strange mix of admiration and frustration. He had never been good at asking for help, and yet here she was, not just helping, but taking the reins without needing to be asked. Something inside him shifted. He could no longer deny that Lisa was becoming indispensable. The next day, they met with the investors. Lisa's adjustments to the financial figures had made the presentation flow seamlessly, and it was clear from the start that the investors were impressed. The meeting went better than Edward had anticipated, and by the end of it, they were signing contracts. As the room emptied out, Edward found himself alone with Lisa, who was packing up the presentation materials. "We did it," he said, surprised by the hint of pride in his voice. Lisa turned to him, her smile wide. "We did, didn't we?" she said, her tone light. But there was something deeper there, something that Edward wasn't ready to acknowledge. He looked at her for a moment, and the air between them felt different. It wasn't just the professional respect he had developed for her. It was something more, something he didn't understand, but couldn't ignore. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "I didn't think you had it in you." Lisa's smile faded slightly, and she looked down at her hands, her expression softening. "I didn't think I had it in me, either. But you gave me a chance." Edward felt his heart skip a beat. He had never been one to admit when he was wrong, but in this case, he couldn't deny it. Lisa had not only changed his company, she had changed him. Later that evening, as Edward sat at his desk, staring at the contracts they had just signed, his mind kept drifting back to Lisa. He couldn't help but think about how far they had come together. He had hired her as just another secretary, someone to handle the mundane tasks he didn't want to do. But now, she had become his right hand, someone he relied on more than anyone else. The thought troubled him, because it wasn't just professional anymore. There was something personal in the way he looked at her. He couldn't pinpoint when it happened, but somewhere along the way, his feelings for Lisa had shifted. He wasn't sure what to do with them, but the longer he worked with her, the more he couldn't ignore them. It was late when Lisa knocked on his office door, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, standing in the doorway, her voice quiet but sincere. Edward looked up, surprised by the emotion in her words. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself." "You've done more than that, Lisa," he replied, his voice unexpectedly soft. Lisa smiled, though there was a hint of something else in her eyes, a quiet understanding that passed between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken connection between them, a shift in the air, and Edward realized he wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he needed to have all the answers. All he knew was that Lisa had changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, she was the one who would change his life in ways he had never expected. The days following the successful investor meeting were a blur for Edward, and yet everything seemed to slow down whenever Lisa was near. It wasn't that she did anything extraordinary, at least, not in the way that most people would define extraordinary, but it was her presence, the way she navigated the office with ease, the way she solved problems before they even arose, the way she smiled when she knew something was about to go wrong, and somehow, it didn't. Edward started noticing the little things. The way she laughed at herself when she spilled coffee on her shirt, the way she always made sure everyone else in the office had what they needed before focusing on her own tasks, the way she simply understood things he didn't have to explain. And each day, those little things seemed to mean more to him than he could admit. But it wasn't just about work. Lisa had changed something deeper in him, something he wasn't sure how to deal with. He had always kept his emotions in check, had always remained the cool, distant CEO. But around her, that distance had started to evaporate. It was a Tuesday morning when it hit him. They were in the middle of a meeting with the marketing team, discussing the company's latest product launch. Edward sat at the head of the table, his usual confident demeanor in place, but his thoughts kept drifting to Lisa. She was seated to his right, flipping through the presentation slides, nodding along to what everyone was saying, but somehow her presence was the only thing that mattered to him. At one point, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, he felt something pass between them, something unspoken. The world seemed to fall away, and all he could think of was the way she looked at him, the way her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. Before he could stop himself, he found himself smiling back. The marketing director cleared her throat, pulling Edward back to the conversation. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, a puzzled look on her face. "I'm sorry. What do you think about the current approach for the product release?" Edward blinked, suddenly aware of how distracted he had been. He quickly gathered himself, clearing his throat. "Yes, I think the launch is solid," he said, his voice calm, but his thoughts still racing. "Let's move forward with the plan." The meeting continued, but Edward couldn't focus. All he could think about was Lisa. When the meeting finally adjourned, he walked back to his office, his mind buzzing. He sat down at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him but not seeing them. The truth was, he was scared. Scared because he wasn't supposed to feel this way. He was the CEO. He was supposed to be in control, not just of his company, but of his emotions. Yet, here he was, completely off balance because of one person, Lisa. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. What was happening to him? He had never been this affected by anyone, and he certainly hadn't expected to be this affected by her. Just then, there was a knock at the door. He looked up, and there stood Lisa, holding a file in her hands. "Mr. Miller, I finished the report you asked for," she said, her voice as calm and professional as always. Edward could feel his pulse quicken just from hearing her voice. "Thanks, Lisa," he replied, trying to sound as composed as possible. "You can leave it on the desk." She walked over and placed the file on his desk. But instead of leaving immediately, she paused, her gaze lingering on him for just a second longer than usual. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her tone softer now, as though she could sense the tension in the room. Edward wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't sure what to do with the emotions that were swirling inside him. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind," he said, his voice quieter than usual. Lisa nodded, her expression sympathetic, but she didn't press him further. Instead, she gave him a small, encouraging smile. "If you need anything, I'm right here," she said. And with that, she turned and left the office. Edward sat there, staring at the door long after she had gone. Something about her words, her smile, it all felt different. He couldn't explain it, but it was like she understood him in a way no one else did. He didn't know if it was just the stress of the job, or if there was something more to this. But he couldn't deny that she had a way of calming him down, of making him feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. But he couldn't allow himself to get too close to her, could he? He was her boss, after all. He couldn't risk crossing that line. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about her being his secretary. It was about the way she made him feel like a person, not just a CEO. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like something worth pursuing. But as he sat there, unsure of what to do next, he couldn't help but wonder, was this a mistake waiting to happen? Or was this exactly what he needed to change everything? Edward spent the next few days in a daze, his mind occupied with thoughts of Lisa, thoughts he couldn't shake no matter how hard he tried. He found himself distracted in meetings, his eyes lingering on her as she moved around the office, her professionalism and effortless grace drawing him in. He hadn't intended for things to evolve this way. He was the CEO, after all, and he had always prided himself on keeping emotions at bay. But with Lisa, it was different. Her presence made the walls he had so carefully built around himself begin to crumble, and it scared him. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful meeting with a client, Edward found himself standing by the large windows in his office, staring out at the city below. The weight of his responsibilities felt heavier than ever, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel as invincible as he usually did. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Lisa. Asterisk. "I finished the project you asked for. Just wanted to check in to see if you needed anything else." Asterisk. Edward read the message twice. Before he realized what he was doing, he was smiling. He quickly typed a reply. Asterisk. "Thanks, Lisa. I'll look over it later. I appreciate your hard work." Asterisk, he put the phone down, but the smile didn't fade. It felt strange to feel so drawn to someone, to feel such warmth for someone who had started as just another employee. As the day wore on, Edward found himself unable to focus on anything except Lisa. He had spent so many years keeping his emotions locked away, building a wall around his heart to protect himself from getting hurt. But with her, the wall felt thinner, almost non-existent. He was terrified of where this could go, but he couldn't ignore how he felt anymore. The next day, Edward decided he needed to do something about it. He couldn't continue to let this uncertainty linger between them. He had been trying to stay professional, but the truth was, he had started to care about her. And he didn't want to keep pretending otherwise. He texted Lisa, asking her to come to his office. His heart raced as he waited for her to arrive, his thoughts spinning in 1,000 directions. When she walked in, her usual calm demeanor put him at ease, but the tension between them was palpable. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. Edward nodded, standing up from his desk. "Yes, Lisa," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "I think it's time we talked." She raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "About what?" she asked, stepping closer. Edward took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "About us," he said, his voice more honest than he had intended. "I've been thinking a lot about how I've been treating you, how I've been treating everyone, and it's not right. I've been distant, cold even, but you've been here, working hard, and you've earned my respect. And more than that, I care about you, Lisa, more than I should." There was a long pause as Lisa absorbed his words. Her expression was unreadable, and Edward couldn't tell what she was thinking. "I don't know what to say," she finally said, her voice soft but not entirely surprised. "You've always been so professional, and I didn't think you would feel the same way." Edward took a step closer to her, feeling the space between them shrinking. "I didn't either," he admitted, "but I can't ignore it anymore. I know this has complicated me being your boss and all, but I wanted to be honest with you." Lisa's gaze softened, and for the first time, Edward saw the vulnerability in her eyes. She looked down for a moment, then met his gaze again. "I've been thinking about it too," she said quietly. "I didn't know if I should say anything because of the way things are between us. But I care about you too, Edward. I'm not sure what that means for us, but I do." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It wasn't the kind of confession either of them had expected, but it was real, and it was honest. Edward took another step closer, now standing right in front of her. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa took a deep breath, as though weighing her options, before she spoke again. "I don't know," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "But I think we should take things one step at a time. We'll figure it out, Edward. I trust you." Edward felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the fear still lingered. The fear of what this could mean for both of them, the fear of losing control, but he knew that he couldn't go back to the way things were. Not now. Not with Lisa in his life. He nodded slowly, his heart lighter than it had been in days. "One step at a time," he agreed. His voice filled with a new sense of resolve. The tension between them finally lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Edward didn't feel so alone. Maybe, just maybe, this was the change he needed. Maybe, just maybe, Lisa was the one who could teach him that being vulnerable didn't make him weak, it made him human. In the days that followed, Edward and Lisa began to navigate their new, delicate balance. They had spoken openly, but the weight of their conversation still lingered in the air between them. Edward tried to act as though nothing had changed, but in reality, everything had. He found himself more aware of Lisa than ever before. The way she smiled at him, the way her eyes lit up when she solved a problem, the way her voice sounded so different to him now, it all felt significant. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be this, caught up in something that felt so personal. The office was still the same, the company still ran smoothly, but for Edward, everything had shifted. They had agreed to take things one step at a time, and that's what they did. They worked together like they always had, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them, a quiet bond that neither could ignore. There were moments when their hands brushed by accident, when their eyes met across the room, and both of them would quickly look away, unsure of what to do with the emotions rising up inside them. But despite the subtle tension, they both carried on, focusing on their work, trying to keep their personal feelings at bay. One day, Edward walked into the office after a long meeting with potential partners. He was exhausted, his mind still spinning with numbers and negotiations. As he walked past Lisa's desk, he noticed that she was staring at the screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. She didn't notice him standing there, so Edward stood for a moment, just watching her. There was something captivating about the way she worked. She wasn't the most polished person he knew, but there was an authenticity in her that drew him in. It made him realize just how much he had underestimated her before. "Lisa," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She jumped slightly, looking up at him. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in," Edward smiled faintly. "I can see that. What's got you so focused?" Lisa hesitated, then pushed the computer screen toward him. "I found something in the report that doesn't add up," she said. "I think we missed something important." Edward leaned over, examining the screen. Lisa had always been diligent in her work, but this was different. She wasn't just doing her job, she was taking ownership of it, going beyond what was expected. He was impressed. "You're right," he said after a moment. "This is important." "Good catch, Lisa." Lisa smiled, but there was a glint in her eyes that made Edward's heart race. "Thanks," she replied, looking up at him. The brief exchange sent a wave of warmth through him, and for a moment, he forgot about everything else. The world outside the office seemed distant, and all he could think about was her. But they couldn't act on it. Not yet. Not here, not now. "I'm glad I could help," she added, her voice softening. Edward cleared his throat, trying to bring himself back to reality. "Well, let's make sure we fix this before the final presentation. We'll have to adjust the numbers." Lisa nodded, her focus shifting back to the task at hand. As Edward sat down at his desk, he couldn't help but think about how much she had changed things. She was more than just a secretary. She had become someone he relied on, someone he trusted. But could this really go anywhere? He was her boss, and that line was a boundary he wasn't sure he should cross. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he didn't want to ignore what he was feeling anymore. He couldn't deny the attraction, the pull he felt every time they spoke, every time they worked together. Lisa had become an important part of his life, both professionally and personally. Later that afternoon, as the day wound down, Lisa knocked on his office door again, this time with a different kind of energy about her. "Mr. Miller, I wanted to go over the final draft for the presentation tomorrow," she said, her tone more upbeat than usual. Edward looked up, smiling. "Of course. Let's take a look." They sat together, going over the details, making adjustments, and for the first time in a while, Edward felt completely at ease. There was no tension, no uncertainty. Just the two of them working together, focused on the task at hand. And yet, even in the professional setting, the undercurrent of something deeper remained. The feeling that something was about to change, something they couldn't ignore anymore. When the meeting ended, Lisa stood up to leave. But before she walked out, she paused. "Edward," she said, her voice gentle, "I know things have been complicated between us, but I just want you to know. I appreciate everything. I appreciate the chance you gave me." Edward looked at her, his heart racing. He had wanted to say something, anything, but the words seemed to get stuck in his throat. He had been so careful around her, trying not to let his emotions show, but in that moment, it felt like everything was coming to the surface. "Lisa," he said softly, standing up to face her. "I'm glad I gave you that chance. And I'm glad you've been here. More than you know." There was a pause, and then, with a small smile, Lisa turned and walked out of the office, leaving Edward standing there, his heart full of things he still didn't quite understand, but somehow, knowing that everything was changing. And for the first time, he wasn't scared of it. As the weeks passed, Edward and Lisa continued to grow closer, but the tension between them never fully disappeared. It was as though they were dancing around, something neither of them was ready to face. At work, they maintained their professional relationship, their conversations still focused on projects, deadlines, and the future of the company. But underneath it all, something was shifting. Edward had always been in control, always keeping his emotions in check. But Lisa had become an anchor in his life, and he couldn't deny it anymore. He thought about her at night, wondered what she was doing, how she was feeling, and if she ever felt the same way. But he couldn't just go up to her and say it. That would complicate everything. Or so he thought. Then, one Thursday afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. Edward had been having one of those days, the kind where everything that could go wrong did. The investors he had met with earlier that morning had raised concerns about the company's upcoming product launch, and the team had fallen behind schedule. He was frustrated, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He walked into his office, hoping for a quiet moment to regroup. But as he opened the door, he found Lisa sitting at his desk again, reviewing some files. She looked up when she heard him enter, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I thought you might need a hand with the numbers," she said, her voice warm. Edward stopped in his tracks, his frustration momentarily forgotten. "I'm not sure I can focus on numbers right now," he replied, his tone more tired than he intended. Lisa stood up from the desk, walking over to where he stood. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion on his face. Without saying anything, she placed a gentle hand on his arm, and for a moment they stood in silence, the weight of the moment settling between them. Edward looked at her, surprised by the gesture, but in that moment, he didn't pull away. Something in the way she touched him, in the way she understood without words, made him realize that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one feeling this pull. "It's been a rough day," she said softly, her voice steady and kind. "But I'm here if you need to talk. You don't have to carry all of this alone." Edward met her gaze, his heart racing in his chest. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she cared, that made him feel vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to feel before. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he found himself taking a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Lisa noticed the hesitation in his eyes, and for a moment, she just watched him, as if waiting for him to make the first move. After a long pause, Edward finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what to do anymore, Lisa," he admitted, the weight of his words hanging in the air. "I've been so focused on building this company, on pushing everyone to be better, that I've forgotten how to just be. And now, with everything that's happening, I feel like I'm losing control." Lisa's hand remained on his arm, offering silent support. "You don't have to have all the answers," she said softly. "No one does. You've built something incredible here, Edward. But you don't have to carry the weight of it alone." Edward felt a lump form in his throat, the raw emotion threatening to overwhelm him. It had been so long since he had allowed himself to be vulnerable, to admit that he didn't have all the answers, but something about Lisa made it feel safe. He looked at her, his gaze softening. "I've been so focused on making everything perfect," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I've realized that maybe I don't need to be perfect. Maybe I just need to be real." Lisa smiled, the warmth of her expression reaching her eyes. "Real is all anyone can ask for," she said gently. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the world between them, but also a sense of understanding that neither had felt before. Edward felt something shift within him, something that he couldn't put into words, but that he knew was important. In that moment, he realized that Lisa wasn't just a colleague anymore. She wasn't just the person who helped him manage his company or keep things running smoothly. She had become something far more significant. She had become the person he trusted the most, the one he turned to when everything felt too heavy. And as he looked at her, something deep inside him knew that they couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. "Thank you, Lisa," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. She nodded, her smile still soft but filled with something deeper now, something that Edward recognized. "Anytime," she replied. As she turned to leave the room, Edward stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence fill the space between them. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing for sure. Things had already changed, and he wasn't sure he could go back. Not anymore. The days following their conversation felt different for Edward. The weight of everything had shifted, and the walls he had built around himself began to feel more like a burden than protection. He had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one who made all the decisions, who was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But with Lisa, everything was different. She had gotten under his skin in a way he hadn't expected. And now he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about relationships, about trust, about what really mattered. Lisa, on the other hand, had done her best to remain professional. She had always known where the boundaries were, after all. She was just his secretary, and he was her boss. But the connection they had felt was undeniable. And every time they spoke, it was harder to ignore the way her heart raced when he walked into the room, or how she felt a warmth spread through her chest when he smiled at her. She had never expected this, never expected to fall for someone she worked for. But there was something about Edward that made her feel seen, truly seen, in a way no one else had. As the weeks went on, they both struggled to keep their emotions in check. Work was busy as usual, but now, every meeting, every glance, every word felt charged with an unspoken energy. It wasn't until one late night, when the office was nearly empty, that things began to change. Edward had been working on a report, staring at his screen but not really seeing it. His mind was far away, occupied with thoughts of Lisa, when suddenly he heard a soft knock at the door. He looked up to see her standing in the doorway, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a quiet hesitation. "Edward?" she asked softly. "Can we talk?" Edward nodded, surprised by the request, but he couldn't deny the surge of hope that rose within him. "Of course, come in." Lisa walked in, closing the door softly behind her. There was something about the stillness of the office at night, the absence of distractions, that made everything feel more intense. She sat down in front of his desk, her hands resting nervously in her lap. Edward could tell something was different. "What's on your mind, Lisa?" he asked gently. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about the other day," she said, her eyes meeting his. "And I realized, I don't want to hide how I feel anymore." Edward's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but hearing it out loud made everything feel more real than ever. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low, steady. Lisa took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've spent so much time pretending that nothing's changed between us, but it has. And it's not just about work anymore, Edward," she said, her words coming out faster now, as though she couldn't keep them in any longer. "I care about you. I care about you in a way that goes beyond all of this, the office, the titles, everything. I can't keep pretending I don't feel it." Edward was silent for a long moment, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He had always known that Lisa meant more to him than just a colleague, but hearing her say it out loud left him breathless. "I feel the same way," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to keep things professional, but the truth is, I can't ignore what's happening between us." There was a long pause, as they both processed the weight of their words. It wasn't just the attraction, the chemistry, it was something deeper, something neither of them had expected. They had built a connection that went beyond the boundaries of a typical work relationship, and now they both had to face it. "So what now?" Lisa asked, her voice quiet but steady, as though she was afraid of the answer. Edward stood up from his desk, walking over to where she sat. He gently took her hand in his touch sending a spark through both of them. "Now, we figure it out," he said, his voice firm but filled with emotion. "One step at a time, just like we agreed." Lisa smiled, her heart swelling with relief. For the first time in a long time, she felt like things might actually be okay, maybe even more than okay. Edward pulled her into a gentle embrace, and for a moment, the world outside the office disappeared. It was just the two of them, navigating the unknown together. And for the first time, Edward didn't feel afraid of what the future held. He wasn't alone anymore, neither of them were. As they pulled away, Lisa looked up at him, her smile softer now, but full of something that felt like promise. "We'll take it slow," she said quietly. "But I think we can do this." Edward nodded, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Yeah, we can." The weight that had been pressing down on him for so long, the fear of the unknown, suddenly didn't seem so heavy. With Lisa by his side, he felt like he could finally breathe again, and as they stood there, hand in hand, they knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. Weeks passed since that night, and Edward and Lisa found their rhythm. The uncertainty that had once defined their relationship had gradually faded, replaced by a new understanding between them. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where they questioned if they were making the right choice. But as time went on, They realized that what they shared wasn't just a passing infatuation, it was real, and it was something they both wanted to explore. At work, their dynamic shifted too. They still maintained their professional roles, but there was an ease between them now, a level of trust that hadn't existed before. Lisa had earned Edward's respect in ways that no one else could, and he had started to see her as more than just a secretary. She was a partner, someone who could challenge him, support him, and make him better. One day, as the company prepared for a big presentation to potential investors, Lisa and Edward were working late in his office, going over the final details. Edward stood by the window, looking out at the city lights below, his mind preoccupied with the upcoming presentation. Lisa was at his desk, reviewing the slides one last time, but she could sense the tension in the air. "You okay?" she asked, not looking up from her work. Edward sighed and turned to face her. "Just thinking," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "This could be the turning point for the company. If this presentation goes well, it's going to change everything. But I can't shake the feeling that something's missing." Lisa stood up and walked over to him, her expression soft but concerned. "Edward," she said gently, "you've already built something incredible. This company, everything you've done, it's a success. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've already changed the game." Edward's heart swelled at her words, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed a little less heavy. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find the words to say. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "You've been a part of this, Lisa. You've helped me see things differently, and I can't tell you how much that means to me." She smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, but there was a tenderness in her voice that made Edward feel something more. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The noise of the office, the pressure of the presentation, the world outside it all seemed distant as they stood there, together, in a quiet moment of understanding. Edward leaned in slightly, his breath catching in his throat. "I don't know what the future holds, Lisa," he said quietly, "but I do know this. I don't want to face it without you." Lisa's heart fluttered at his words, and she took a deep breath. She had never expected to be in this position. But now, standing here with him, she realized just how much she had come to care for him. "You don't have to," she said softly, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "I'm right here." The moment felt like everything they had been working toward had culminated in this single perfect exchange. They weren't just business partners anymore. They were something more, something that neither of them had planned, but something that felt right. The next day, the presentation went better than either of them could have expected. The investors were impressed, and by the end of the meeting, Edward knew that the company's future was secure. But as they left the conference room, the first thing he did was look at Lisa, his partner in everything. "We did it," he said with a grin, his eyes full of pride. Lisa smiled back, her heart swelling with pride of her own. "We did," she agreed, her voice warm. As they stood there, in the midst of the company's success, something else was happening too. Edward had found not just a successful career, but someone who made him feel alive, someone who believed in him, and someone he could see a future with. And Lisa, in turn, had found someone who saw her as more than just a secretary, but as an equal, as a partner, as someone worth loving. That night, after the dust had settled and the celebrations had ended, they found themselves back at the office, just the two of them. The office was quiet, the lights dim, and for the first time, it felt like they could breathe. "Edward," Lisa said softly, as they both sat down at his desk, their work done for the day. "What happens now?" Edward looked at her, his heart full of gratitude and something deeper. "Now, we take it one step at a time," he said, his voice filled with quiet certainty. "But I know this. I'm glad we're doing this together." Lisa nodded, her eyes shining with warmth. "Me too." And with that, they leaned in, sharing a moment of peace, knowing that the future, whatever it might hold, was theirs to shape together. Discover the captivating journey of love, ambition, and transformation in this inspiring tale of a CEO and his secretary. Their professional relationship evolves into something far deeper, proving that even in the fast-paced world of business, true connections can change everything. This is one of the most heartwarming millionaire stories you'll ever hear. From moments of self-doubt to incredible achievements, the story unfolds with the challenges, victories, and quiet moments of vulnerability that come with forging an unexpected bond. As the story of their relationship develops, we witness the power of trust and personal growth, transforming their lives both professionally and personally. Like many millionaire stories, this one begins with a simple connection, but it's through perseverance, understanding, and honesty that the characters ultimately find a love that defies expectations. Their journey reminds us all that, no matter how high you climb, the most meaningful things in life are the relationships we build. This millionaire story captures the essence of what it means to break through the walls we put up and embrace love and partnership. As they navigate their feelings and professional commitments, they face challenges that only make their bond stronger, offering a refreshing perspective on love and success. These millionaire stories prove that true happiness often comes from unexpected places, and sometimes, all it takes is one step toward honesty and vulnerability to change everything. Don't miss out on this touching story that shows how two people can grow together against all odds. Tune in to hear the final chapter of this heartfelt millionaire story.